What kind of narcissism does it take to sign your own name at a murder scene? Not metaphorically, not symbolically, but to literally write your full legal name in the blood of the person you just killed again and again and again, as if you were autographing your work. Welcome to this journey into one of the most psychologically disturbing cases in the annals of American true crime. But before we descend into the twisted mind of a killer who wanted fame more than anything, even freedom, I need you to ask yourself, what's the difference between a signature and a confession? Between wanting to be known and wanting to be caught? Tell us where you're watching from right now and whether you believe someone can commit murder purely for the promise of recognition, because by the end of this account, you'll understand that most dangerous weapon isn't a knife or a gun, it's a signature, it's a name, it's the human hunger to be remembered, twisted into something monstrous. This content discusses real historical events involving loss of life and extreme violence. We present these accounts with profound respect for those who suffered, died, and were left behind. This is not entertainment. This is testimony. This episode contains detailed descriptions of violence, death, and suffering. The details included serve understanding, not sensationalism, but they are disturbing. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. In the archives of the Los Angeles Police Department, there exists a file that defies every principle of criminal psychology. 17 crime scenes spanning 3 years, 17 victims, and at every single one, written in the victim's own blood on walls, mirrors, or floors, the same name, not a symbol, not a calling card, a name, the killer's actual legal name, as if she were signing a guest book at a wedding, as if murder were simply her way of saying, "I was here." We're about to delve into a mystery that shattered our understanding of serial offenders, where one woman's pathological need for recognition transformed into a killing spree so brazen, so deliberately traceable, that it seemed impossible until it wasn't. This isn't just a story about murder. This is a question about what happens when the desire to be seen becomes more powerful than the instinct to survive. It was the year 1993. The country was still reeling from the Rodney King riots. The World Trade Center had been bombed for the first time, and Los Angeles was trying to rebuild its shattered sense of safety. But in the sprawling anonymity of America's second largest city, one woman was about to prove that sometimes the most visible monsters are the ones we never see coming because we can't believe anyone would be that obvious, that reckless, that desperate to be known. The spring of 1993 arrived in Los Angeles the way it always did, with a haze that wasn't quite fog and wasn't quite smog, but something uniquely Californian, a veil that made the city feel both intimate and utterly anonymous at the same time. You could disappear in Los Angeles. Millions did. It was a city built on the promise of reinvention, where you could become anyone, where your past could evaporate like morning mist burning off the Pacific. But what happens when someone doesn't want to disappear? What happens when the crushing weight of invisibility becomes so unbearable that a person would do anything, literally anything, to make the world learn their name? In the Koreatown district, between the neon signs advertising karaoke bars and the small family restaurants serving jjigae, the elderly moved through their routines with the careful precision of people who had survived worse than urban poverty. These were immigrants, first-generation Americans, people who had rebuilt their lives from nothing once and were determined never to be nothing again. They lived in studio apartments and shared housing. They worked multiple jobs. They sent money home to family in Seoul or Busan. And they minded their own business because that's how you survived in a city that could swallow you whole. Mrs. Sunyi Park was 72 years old in the spring of 1993. She had come to America in 1970, one with her husband, who had died 6 years earlier from a heart attack while working his third shift as a janitor in a downtown office building. Sunyi had never remarried. She lived alone in a small apartment on Vermont Avenue, on the third floor of a building that smelled perpetually of garlic and sesame oil and the particular mustiness of old carpets that had absorbed decades of life. Every morning she woke at 5:30. Every morning she walked to the corner store and bought a single apple, a small container of milk, and the Korea daily newspaper. Every morning she returned home, made tea, and read the news in her native language, connected to a country she hadn't seen in over 20 years, but that still lived in her bones. On the morning of March 17th, Sunyi Park's routine was interrupted. Her neighbor, Mr. Kim, noticed her door ajar at 7:45. This was wrong. Sunyi never left her door open. She was meticulous about locks, about security, about the small rituals of safety that made a person feel less vulnerable in a city of millions. Mr. Kim knocked, called her name, pushed the door open slowly, already feeling the cold certainty of wrongness spreading through his chest. The smell hit him first, copper and something else, something organic and terrible. Then he saw it. Sunyi Park lay on her kitchen floor in a pool of blood that had spread across the linoleum in a dark, congealing lake. Her throat had been cut with such force that her head was nearly severed. The violence was extreme, personal, the kind of overkill that suggested rage or panic or something far worse, pleasure. But that wasn't what made Mr. Kim scream. That wasn't what made him stumble backward into the hallway, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. On the wall above Sunyi's body, written in her blood with what appeared to be careful, deliberate strokes, as if the writer had taken their time, as if they had used her blood like paint, were 3 words, Maria Elena Contreras, not a message, not a threat, not a symbol or a cryptic clue designed to taunt investigators. A name, a full name, first, middle, and last, written in neat, almost elegant cursive, as if someone were practicing their signature, as if someone were signing their work. Detective Raymond Martinez of the LAPD Homicide Division received the call at 8:17 that morning. He had been a detective for 11 years at that point, had worked everything from gang shootings to domestic murders, had seen bodies in every conceivable state of decomposition and destruction. But when he walked into Sunyi Park's apartment 3 minutes later, he stopped in the doorway and just stared. "Tell me that's not what I think it is," he said to the officer securing the scene. The officer, a rookie named Jackson, who looked about ready to vomit, just nodded. "It's a name, detective, a full name, in the victim's blood." Martinez moved closer, careful not to disturb the blood evidence. The name was written approximately 4 feet above the floor, centered on the wall like a painting in a gallery. The letters were formed with remarkable consistency, no drips, no smears beyond the intentional strokes. Whoever had written this had taken their time, had wanted it to be legible, had wanted it to be perfect. "Run the name," Martinez said quietly. "Maria Elena Contreras, full background check. I want to know everything about this person, where they live, where they work, if they have so much as an unpaid parking ticket." But even as he gave the order, Martinez felt a creeping sense of unreality, because this didn't make sense. Serial killers didn't sign their real names at crime scenes. Even the most narcissistic offenders used symbols, signatures that were personal but deniable. The Zodiac Killer used his symbol. BTK sent letters. The Night Stalker left behind satanic imagery. But an actual, legal name. Either this was the stupidest criminal in the history of Los Angeles, or something far stranger was happening. The background check on Maria Elena Contreras came back within 2 hours. She was a 31-year-old woman living in Echo Park, approximately 4 miles from the murder scene. Born in Los Angeles to Mexican immigrant parents, she had graduated from Roosevelt High School with unremarkable grades, had worked a series of low-wage jobs, fast food, retail, data entry. No criminal record, not even a speeding ticket. She was, according to every database the LAPD had access to, utterly ordinary. Invisible, Martinez and his partner, Detective Sarah Chen, drove to Contreras' address, a small apartment building on Sunset Boulevard, wedged between a laundromat and a taqueria. The building was the kind of place where people came and went without anyone noticing, where you could live for years and never learn your neighbor's name. They knocked on apartment C. A woman answered on the third knock. Maria Elena Contreras was short, 5 feet 2 inches, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore jeans and a plain white t-shirt, no makeup, no jewelry. When she looked at the detectives, her expression was neutral, almost blank, like someone who had been interrupted during a particularly boring task. "Maria Elena Contreras?" Martinez asked. "Yes, I'm Detective Martinez. This is Detective Chen. We need to ask you some questions about an incident that occurred this morning." Something flickered in her eyes, not fear, not surprise, something else. Something that made Martinez's instincts scream. "Am I being arrested?" she asked. Her voice was flat, almost monotone. "Should you be?" Chen asked carefully. Contreras smiled. It was the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes, the kind that made you take an involuntary step backward without knowing why. "You're here about Mrs. Park," she said, not a question, a statement. The detectives exchanged glances. Martinez felt his pulse accelerate. "How do you know about Mrs. Park?" he asked. "Because I wrote my name there," Contreras said simply. "I thought that would make it easier for you to find me. I've been waiting all morning. I was starting to think you weren't very good at your jobs." There's a moment in every detective's career when reality shifts, when something happens that doesn't fit into any of the categories your training provided. This was that moment for Martinez. He had heard confessions before, tearful, angry, defiant, resigned. But he had never heard someone confess like they were confirming a restaurant reservation. "Ms. Contreras," Chen said, her hand moving subtly toward her weapon, "are you telling us you killed Sunyi Park?" "Yes," Contreras said. "I killed her. I killed all of them, and I signed every single one so you'd know it was me. All of them." The words hung in the air like a curse. "How many?" Martinez asked, his mouth dry. Contreras tilted her head slightly, as if considering the question. "I've lost count," she said. "Maybe 15, 16. You'll have to check your records. I'm sure you've found at least some of them by now. I've been doing this for almost 3 years." What happened next would become one of the most surreal arrests in LAPD history. Maria Elena Contreras didn't resist, didn't run, didn't ask for a lawyer. She simply held out her wrists for the handcuffs, followed the detectives to their car, and sat quietly in the back seat as they drove to the station. During the entire ride, she stared out the window with the same blank expression, as if she were watching a movie she'd already seen before. At the station, in the interview room, with the tape recorder running and 2 detectives watching her with a mixture of horror and fascination, Maria Elena Contreras began to talk. And what she said would rewrite everything law enforcement thought they knew about serial murder. "I wanted to be famous," she said simply. "I wanted people to know my name. That's all I ever wanted." Detective Chen leaned forward. "So you killed people." "Not just killed," Contreras corrected. "I made art. I made myself known, Every time I signed my name, I was saying, I exist, I matter, I was here. You understand you're confessing to murder, Martinez said carefully. Multiple murders, of course, Contreras said. That's the point. How else would anyone remember me? I'm nobody. I've always been nobody. I work at Target, I ring up purchases, I fold clothes, I go home to an empty apartment, and I disappear. Nobody knows my name, nobody would care if I died tomorrow. I would just vanish, like I was never here at all. There was something in her voice, not regret, not even sadness, but a kind of desperate hunger that was almost painful to witness. Do you know how invisible you can be in a city of millions? She continued. Do you know what it's like to wake up every morning knowing that you could cease to exist and absolutely nothing would change? I needed to matter. I needed to be seen. I needed my name to mean something. So you murdered 17 people, Chen said, her voice hard. You cut their throats, you took their lives, you destroyed families. So people would know your name. Yes, Contreras said, and her smile returned. And now they will. Now everyone will know Maria Elena Contreras. They'll write books about me, make documentaries. People will remember my name long after I'm dead. I'll be studied, analyzed. I'll matter. This is the moment where most people expect the story to become a straightforward case of narcissistic personality disorder, of a hungry killer who wanted attention at any cost. But the truth, the real truth that emerged over the following months, was far more complex and far more disturbing. Because Maria Elena Contreras wasn't lying about being invisible. She was the product of a system that had failed her in every possible way. Not an excuse for murder, but a context that made her pathology comprehensible, even if it could never be forgivable. The investigation that followed Contreras's arrest became one of the most extensive in Los Angeles history. Detectives began the grim work of connecting her confession to actual crime scenes, of finding the bodies she claimed to have left in her wake. And what they discovered was even more disturbing than her confession suggested. The signature, her name, written in blood, appeared at 17 crime scenes spanning from August of 1990 to March of 1993. 17 victims, 17 times she had written Maria Elena Contreras in blood. But here's what made the case so psychologically complex. Not all of these crime scenes had been discovered as homicides. 4 of the victims had been classified as suicides. 3 had been listed as accidental deaths. 2 had been reported as natural causes in elderly victims who were already in poor health. The investigating officers at the time had noted the blood writing, had documented it in their reports, but had assumed it was the work of the victim. A dying message, a final act of confusion, a suicide note written in the most horrifying way possible. Because who would believe someone would write their real name at a murder scene? It was too obvious, too stupid, too impossible. So the investigators had looked for other explanations, more reasonable explanations, anything that made more sense than the truth. That someone was literally signing murders like an artist signing paintings. Detective Martinez assembled a task force to review every case where Contreras's name appeared in blood. What they uncovered was a 3-year killing spree that had hidden in plain sight precisely because it was so blatant. The first victim was discovered on August 12, 1990. His name was Thomas Chen, no relation to Detective Chen, a 67-year-old retired bus driver who lived alone in a small house in Highland Park. Thomas was found in his bathroom by his daughter when she came to check on him after he missed their weekly Sunday dinner. His throat had been cut, and on the bathroom mirror, written in his blood, Maria Elena Contreras. The investigating officers at the time had been puzzled, but had ultimately concluded that Thomas must have written the name himself. Perhaps the name of someone he believed had wronged him, perhaps a woman he'd been involved with, perhaps simple confusion in his final moments. The case was classified as a murder, but with no leads and no evidence beyond the name, it went cold within weeks. The second victim was found 3 months later, Margaret Sullivan, 74, an Irish immigrant who lived in a small apartment in Silver Lake. Same method, throat cut with extreme force. Same signature on the wall above her body. Again, investigators assumed she had written it herself. The case file noted, victim may have been attempting to identify her attacker, but was too confused to write a coherent message. By the fifth victim, the pattern should have been obvious. But it wasn't, because the pattern was too obvious, because no one could believe someone would be that stupid, that reckless, that desperate to be caught. Or as Maria Elena Contreras would later explain, no one could believe someone would be that desperate to be seen. In the interview room, over the course of 3 days and nearly 40 hours of recorded interrogation, Contreras provided details about each murder that only the killer could know. She described the victims' homes, their habits, how she had gained entry, how they had pleaded or fought or simply stared at her in confusion as she attacked them. She showed no remorse, no emotion beyond a kind of clinical detachment, as if she were describing a hobby rather than mass murder. "Why did you choose elderly victims?" Martinez asked during one session. Contreras shrugged. "They were easier, they lived alone, they were already invisible like me. Nobody checked on them regularly. I could spend time at the scene, make sure my signature was perfect. They were." "Practice? Practice for what?" "For being remembered," she said, as if this were the most obvious answer in the world. Dr. Patricia Morneau, the forensic psychiatrist assigned to evaluate Contreras, spent 32 hours interviewing her over the course of 6 weeks. What she discovered was a psychological profile unlike anything she had encountered in 20 years of evaluating violent offenders. Maria Elena Contreras was not, technically speaking, a psychopath. She understood right from wrong. She knew her actions were illegal and harmful. She even acknowledged that her victims had suffered, that families had been destroyed, that what she had done was morally indefensible. She simply didn't care, or rather, and this is the crucial distinction, she cared more about being known than about being good. Dr. Morneau's report, which would later be submitted to the court, painted a portrait of profound pathological narcissism combined with what she termed recognition starvation syndrome, a condition where the need to be acknowledged, to be seen, to be remembered becomes so overwhelming that it supersedes all other human drives, including self-preservation. Ms. Contreras grew up in extreme emotional neglect. Dr. Morneau wrote, "Not physical abuse or deprivation, but a complete absence of recognition as an individual with value. Her parents worked multiple jobs and were rarely home. When they were present, they were exhausted and emotionally unavailable. She had no siblings, no close friends. She was an average student, not gifted enough to stand out, not troubled enough to attract intervention. She was perfectly, painfully invisible." The report continued. In her own words, she describes feeling like a ghost in her own life. She could walk into a room and people's eyes would slide past her as if she weren't there. She could speak and people wouldn't hear her. She existed in the margins of other people's lives, never the main character, not even a supporting player. Just background noise. This created a psychological wound so profound that it became the organizing principle of her entire existence. But here's what made Maria Elena Contreras different from most people who suffer from similar emotional neglect. She possessed what Dr. Morneau called pathological persistence, combined with an absolute absence of empathy inhibition. In simpler terms, she was willing to do anything, anything at all, to achieve her goal of being recognized, and she had no internal mechanism that stopped her from harming others in pursuit of that goal. Most people who crave recognition pursue it through achievement, creativity, relationships, or even destructive, but legal means like attention, seeking behavior, or social media obsession, Dr. Morneau explained in her testimony. Ms. Contreras looked at those paths and saw them as too uncertain, too dependent on other people's validation. She wanted certainty. She wanted her name to be known absolutely and forever, and she realized that the fastest path to permanent recognition was through notoriety. The trial of Maria Elena Contreras began on October 4, 1994. It lasted 6 weeks and became a media sensation, exactly what Contreras had wanted. Every day, she sat in the courtroom with the same blank expression, occasionally smiling when the prosecution displayed crime scene photos that showed her signature. When asked by the judge if she understood the charges against her, she replied, "Yes, Your Honor. I killed 17 people and made sure everyone would know it was me. That was the whole point." Her defense attorney, a public defender named Robert Yamamoto, who had been assigned to the case, attempted to mount an insanity defense. But Contreras refused to cooperate. She was perfectly sane, she insisted. She knew exactly what she was doing. She had planned every murder carefully. She wanted to be held fully responsible because being held responsible meant being acknowledged. "If I'm found not guilty by reason of insanity," she told Yamamoto during a pretrial conference, "then it wasn't really me who did it. It was my illness, but I did it, me, Maria Elena Contreras. I need everyone to understand that." The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. Crime scene photos showing her name at 17 different locations. Her detailed confessions that matched evidence only the killer could know. Forensic evidence placing her at multiple scenes, and testimony from Dr. Morneau explaining her pathology. The defense had nothing to counter with except the argument that someone this blatant, this obvious, this desperate to be caught couldn't possibly be considered fully rational. The jury deliberated for 7 hours. When they returned, the forewoman read the verdict: guilty on 17 counts of first-degree murder, guilty on all counts of special circumstances, guilty without qualification or mitigation. Maria Elena Contreras smiled. During the penalty phase, the prosecution argued for the death penalty. The defense argued for life in prison without parole. Victim impact statements were read by family members, daughters who had lost mothers, sons who had lost fathers, grandchildren who had lost grandparents. They described grief, trauma, the impossibility of understanding how someone could kill their loved ones simply to make a name for themselves. Contreras listened to each statement with the same blank expression. When given the opportunity to address the court before sentencing, she declined. Her attorney later said that she told him, "What's left to say? They already know my name. Mission accomplished." On December 9, 1994, Judge Patricia Henderson sentenced Maria Elena Contreras to 17 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. California had a moratorium on the death penalty at the time, but Judge Henderson made it clear that if execution had been an option, she would have imposed it. You have committed acts of such calculated cruelty, such profound selfishness, that they defy comprehension. Judge Henderson said from the bench, "You have destroyed 17 lives and devastated countless others' families, friends, entire communities, all because you wanted attention, you wanted fame, you wanted to be remembered. Well, Ms. Contreras, you will be remembered. You will be remembered as one of the most narcissistic, heartless killers in American history. You will be remembered as a cautionary tale about what happens when the human need for recognition metastasizes into something monstrous. And you will spend the rest of your life in a cell, knowing that the only thing you'll be known for is the suffering you caused. Contreras was transferred to the California Institution for Women in Corona, where she remains to this day. She is now 62 years old. She has been incarcerated for 30 years, and in those 3 decades, she has given exactly 3 interviews, each one a masterclass in pathological narcissism. In 2006, a journalist named Sarah Koenig interviewed Contreras for a documentary about female serial killers. When asked if she had any regrets, Contreras said, "I regret that it took so long for the police to figure it out. I was signing my name from the very beginning. I made it as easy as possible, but people don't believe something can be that obvious. They always look for complexity when sometimes the truth is just simple. I wanted to be famous, so I became a killer." In 2015, another journalist asked if she felt any remorse for her victims. Contreras replied, "I feel sorry that they had to die for me to matter, but someone had to. That's just how it works. You can't be famous without affecting other people's lives. Actors need audiences. Artists need subjects. I needed victims. It's all the same principle. You can't be known in isolation." The most recent interview was conducted in 2022 by a forensic psychology graduate student researching extreme narcissistic pathology. The student asked Contreras if she understood that most people found her motivations incomprehensible. Contreras laughed a short, sharp sound devoid of real humor. "Of course they don't understand," she said, "because most people matter to someone. They have families who love them, friends who care about them, jobs where they're valued. They exist in the world, and the world acknowledges their existence. They can't imagine what it's like to be truly invisible, to be so insignificant that you could disappear and nobody would even notice. They can't imagine the desperation of screaming into a void and having no sound come out. So no, they don't understand, but I don't need them to understand. I just need them to know my name." And that's the truly horrifying part of Maria Elena Contreras' story. She succeeded. Her name is known. It's in databases, in true crime archives, in academic papers about narcissistic personality disorders and fame, seeking behavior. Whenever someone researches signature killers or narcissistic serial offenders, they find her name. When true crime enthusiasts compile lists of the most unusual killers, there she is. She wanted to matter. She wanted to be remembered, and she is. But at what cost? The families of her 17 victims have spent 30 years trying to reclaim their loved ones' legacies from the shadow of their killer. Every anniversary, every memorial, every attempt to honor the dead is complicated by the fact that they died at the hands of someone whose only motivation was self-aggrandizement. Their deaths weren't personal. They weren't even meaningful to the person who killed them. They were just stepping stones. Sacrifices on the altar of one woman's pathological need to be seen. Mrs. Soon-Yi Park, who survived the Korean War and immigrated to America with nothing but hope and determination, reduced to victim number 17. Thomas Chen, who drove buses for 40 years and never missed a day of work, reduced to victim number 1. Margaret Sullivan, who raised 6 children and 23 grandchildren, reduced to a name on a list. This is what Maria Elena Contreras took from them, not just their lives, but their dignity in death. She made their deaths about her. Even now, 3 decades later, their deaths are still about her. In 2019, a group of family members from Contreras' victims formed an organization called Remember Them, Not Her. Their mission is simple: to ensure that when people talk about these murders, they focus on the victims' lives, not the killer's pathology. They've created a memorial website with photographs and biographies of each person who was killed. They hold annual remembrance ceremonies. They've lobbied to change how the media reports on serial killers, arguing for a focus on victims rather than perpetrators. Linda Chen, Thomas Chen's daughter, spoke at a victims' rights conference in 2021. Her words cut to the heart of why Contreras' case is so disturbing. "My father wasn't killed because of who he was. He wasn't killed because of anything he did or didn't do. He was killed because he was alone, vulnerable, and convenient. He was killed so a woman who felt invisible could write her name in his blood. And that's the part that haunts me, not just that he died, but that his death was so meaningless to the person who killed him. She didn't hate him. She didn't even know him. He was just a canvas for her signature. That's the true horror of narcissistic violence. You're not even human to your killer. You're just an opportunity." Dr. Morneau, who has continued to study Contreras' case over the past 3 decades, published a paper in 2023 titled "The Pathology of Recognition: When the Need to Be Seen Becomes Lethal." In it, she argues that Contreras represents a new category of serial killer, one motivated not by sexual gratification, not by power or control in the traditional sense, but by what she calls existential validation through notoriety. Maria Elena Contreras killed to prove she existed. Dr. Morneau writes, "In a world that had rendered her invisible, murder became her way of forcing the world to acknowledge her presence. This represents a fundamentally different pathology from traditional serial killers, and it raises disturbing questions about our modern culture of fame, recognition, and the psychological impact of social invisibility." The paper has sparked debate in forensic psychology circles about whether social media and our cultural obsession with fame and recognition might be creating more killers like Contreras, people so desperate to be known that they'll pursue notoriety through violence. It's a question that feels increasingly relevant. In the 3 decades since Contreras' arrest, we've seen multiple cases of mass shooters who explicitly stated that they wanted to be famous, who live-streamed their crimes, who left manifestos designed to ensure they'd be remembered. We've seen attention-seeking behavior become more extreme, more desperate, more violent. Are we creating Maria Elena Contrerases? Are we building a society where being nobody feels like a fate worse than death, where the only thing that matters is being known, being seen, being remembered, even if what you're remembered for is monstrous? These are uncomfortable questions, questions that don't have easy answers, but they're questions we need to ask. Because here's the truly chilling part of this story: Maria Elena Contreras is not an anomaly. She's not some aberration that emerged from nowhere and could never be repeated. She's a product of specific psychological and social conditions, conditions that still exist, that might even be intensifying in our hyper-connected yet profoundly lonely modern world. How many people right now are feeling that same desperate invisibility that Contreras felt? How many are searching for meaning, for recognition, for proof that they exist and matter? And how many of them are one crisis, one rejection, one moment of desperation away from deciding that negative attention is better than no attention at all? We like to think that people like Contreras are rare, unique, impossible to understand, but the truth is more disturbing. They're rare in action, but common in desire. Lots of people want to be famous. Lots of people feel invisible. Lots of people struggle with the existential horror of being insignificant. Most of them don't become killers. Most of them find healthier ways to seek validation, or they learn to find meaning in things other than external recognition, or they simply endure the quiet suffering of feeling unseen without turning that suffering outward into violence. But some don't. Some decide that any recognition, even infamy, is better than oblivion. Some conclude that it's better to be notorious than to be nobody. Some calculate that 17 deaths are an acceptable price to pay for immortality. That's the lesson of Maria Elena Contreras. Not that she's a monster we can't comprehend, but that she's a human being whose pathology we can comprehend all too well. And that's what makes her so terrifying. To this day, Contreras remains in prison. She will die in prison. She has no hope of parole, no possibility of freedom, no future beyond concrete walls and controlled movements and the slow march toward death in captivity. And yet, by her own metrics, she succeeded. She wanted her name to be known. It is. She wanted to matter. In the worst possible way, she does. The question we're left with is this: what does it say about us that we've created a world where someone could look at 17 murders and see them as a ladder to significance? What does it say about our culture, our values, our social structures, that being nobody can feel so unbearable that violence becomes preferable? And maybe most uncomfortably, how many other Maria Elena Contrerases are out there right now, invisible and desperate, calculating whether the price of recognition might be worth paying? In the files of the LAPD, in the archives of the California Department of Corrections, in the memory of 17 families who lost people they loved, the name Maria Elena Contreras is preserved. Written not in blood this time, but in official documents, in testimony transcripts, in victim impact statements and psychological evaluations and legal briefs. She signed her name. She made herself known. She succeeded in her terrible goal. And 17 people died so she could feel like she mattered. If this journey through the psychology of narcissistic violence and the desperate human need for recognition has resonated with you, if you find yourself lying awake tonight pondering how thin the line is between wanting to be seen and being willing to destroy others to achieve it, then this channel has more truths waiting in the shadows. Subscribe if you're willing to confront the uncomfortable questions about human nature that society would prefer to ignore. Leave a like if this account provoked something deeper than entertainment, if it made you question what it means to matter, what it means to be known, and what price we're willing to pay for significance. And in the comments, I want to know, where is the line? When does the need for recognition become pathological? Could you understand, even if you could never condone, the desperate hunger to be remembered? And if you felt truly invisible, truly insignificant, truly erased, what wouldn't you do to prove you existed? Until next time, remember, the most terrifying stories are the ones that force us to see ourselves clearly. And sometimes, the darkness we're really afraid of is the one that whispers, "What if nobody ever knows my name? What if I disappear and nothing changes? What if I never mattered at all?" That's the question Maria Elena Contreras couldn't live with. And 17 people died because she found an answer.